August 1942, the ruins of Stalingrad. A German soldier stumbles through smoke and ash as Soviet snipers watch from the shadows. He falls and another shot rings out. The Wehrmacht and Hitler's unstoppable war machine had just met the wall it couldn't break. The dictator Adolf Hitler, architect of genocide and military genius turned madman, had gambled everything on one city. 6 months later, 300,000 German soldiers would be surrounded and starving and freezing to death in the snow. Their commander would surrender against Hitler's direct orders. This is the Battle of Stalingrad, the graveyard where Nazi Germany came to die. If you want to understand why Stalingrad mattered, you have to understand what Hitler was after. Because Stalingrad wasn't just a city, it was the gateway to Soviet oil. By summer 1942, Nazi Germany controlled most of Europe. France had fallen and Britain was alone. But Hitler needed fuel because his tanks and his planes and his entire war machine ran on oil. And the richest oil fields in Europe lay just beyond Stalingrad in the Caucasus region. Capture Stalingrad and you control the Volga River, which was the main supply route bringing oil north to Moscow. Cut that river and the Soviet Union bleeds out. But there was something else. The city bore the name of Joseph Stalin himself. Stalingrad, Stalin's city. For Hitler, taking it would humiliate his greatest enemy. For Stalin, losing it was unthinkable. The stage was set for the most brutal urban battle in human history. Rewind 1 year to June 1941, when Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. Over 3 million German troops pour across the Soviet border. The Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, worked like a charm. Soviet armies crumbled, and within months German tanks reached the gates of Moscow. Hitler predicted total victory by Christmas. But winter came early and temperatures dropped to -40 degrees. German soldiers froze in their summer uniforms while Soviet forces prepared for the cold counterattack. The Wehrmacht was pushed back. Hitler refused to accept defeat. In spring 1942, he planned a new offensive, and this time the target was the south. Operation Blue, with the objective to capture the oil fields of Baku and destroy Soviet industrial power at Stalingrad. On August 23, 1942, the German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. That same day, over 600 German bombers turned the city into an inferno. 40,000 civilians died in the first week of bombing alone. The Battle of Stalingrad had begun. Stalingrad stretched along the western bank of the Volga River. Factories and apartment blocks and parks all reduced to rubble, but rubble made perfect cover. General Vasily Chuikov commanded the Soviet 62nd Army defending the city. His orders from Stalin were simple: not one step back. Retreat meant execution. Chuikov turned Stalingrad into a maze of death. His soldiers fought from bombed-out buildings and sewers and basements. They invented a new kind of warfare called Rattenkrieg, or rat warfare. Close combat, house to house, room to room, and sometimes floor by floor in the same building. German soldiers called it the Stalingrad Academy of Street Fighting. Training meant nothing here. A Russian sniper could kill you from 300 meters away, or a grenade could roll into your bunker at 3 in the morning. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was 24 hours. One building became legendary, and that was Pavlov's house. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and 30 men held a single apartment building for 58 days against constant German assault. They fortified every window and planted mines in every stairwell and refused to surrender. The Germans lost more men trying to take that one building than they did conquering entire countries. Meanwhile, Soviet snipers became ghosts. Vasily Zaitsev was the most famous, and he killed over 200 German soldiers. His duel with a Nazi sniper instructor became legend. For days they hunted each other through the ruins, until finally Zaitsev spotted a glint of light off a rifle scope. One shot and the German instructor was dead. By November, the Germans controlled 90% of Stalingrad, but they couldn't take the last 10%. The Soviets clung to a narrow strip of riverbank. Supplies came across the Volga under German fire every night. Soldiers and ammunition and food all delivered in darkness. General Paulus assured Hitler that we'll have the city in days. But days turned to weeks and weeks to months, and winter was coming again. While the Germans bled themselves in Stalingrad's streets, Soviet generals were planning something massive called Operation Uranus, a double encirclement. The German Sixth Army was a dagger pointed into Stalingrad, but its flanks were weak and defended by Romanian and Italian troops with outdated equipment and low morale. On November 19, 1942, at 7:30 in the morning, the temperature was minus 18 degrees Celsius. Soviet artillery opened fire, and over 3,500 guns hammered Axis positions. Then came the tanks as waves of Tu-34s smashed through Romanian lines north of the city. The next day, a second Soviet force attacked from the south. Within 4 days, the two Soviet armies met at Kalak, which was a town west of Stalingrad. The trap snapped shut. 300,000 German and Axis soldiers were surrounded and cut off with no escape. Hitler's reaction was stand and fight with no retreat. He promoted Paulus to field marshal and reminded him that no German field marshal had ever surrendered. The message was clear: win or die. Hermann Göring, who was the head of the Luftwaffe, promised to supply the trapped army by air. He claimed we'll deliver 500 tons of supplies daily. It was a lie. On the best days, German planes delivered 100 tons, and most days far less. And Soviet fighters shot down transport planes like clay pigeons. Inside the pocket, soldiers starved, horses were butchered and eaten, and then came the cold. Frostbite claimed thousands and wounded men froze to death in unheated field hospitals. Fuel ran out and ammunition ran low. And still, Hitler's order remained to fight to the last man. By January 1943, the situation was hopeless. Soviet forces tightened the noose and German positions shrank day by day. On January 8, the Soviets offered Paulus terms of surrender to lay down your weapons and receive food and medical care, and return home after the war. Paulus asked Hitler for permission to surrender. Hitler's reply was forbidden, and that the Sixth Army will hold to the last soldier. On January 30th, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal in a desperate attempt to motivate him. The message was cruel because no field marshal has ever surrendered, so do your duty. But the next day on January 31st, Paulus surrendered anyway. His words to his staff were that I have no intention of shooting myself for this Bohemian corporal. The northern pocket of German forces held out 2 more days. On February 2nd, 1943, the last German unit surrendered. Of the 300,000 Axis soldiers trapped at Stalingrad, only 91,000 survived to surrender. Most were sick and starving and frostbitten. Of those prisoners, only 6,000 ever made it home. The rest died in Soviet labor camps. German losses at Stalingrad were catastrophic, an entire field army destroyed, and the myth of German invincibility shattered. Stalingrad was the turning point of World War II. Before Stalingrad, Germany advanced, and after Stalingrad, Germany retreated. The Soviets never stopped pushing west. In 1945, they would raise the red flag over the ruins of Berlin. But the cost was staggering. Soviet casualties at Stalingrad were over 1.1 million dead, wounded, or captured. Civilian deaths were estimated at 40,000 to 100,000. The city was obliterated, and photos show nothing but rubble for miles. After the war, Stalingrad was rebuilt and renamed Volgograd in 1961. Today, a massive statue called the Motherland Calls stands on Mamayev Kurgan, which was the hill that saw some of the fiercest fighting. It's one of the tallest statues in the world with a sword raised to the sky, honoring the defenders who refused to break. The battle changed warfare. Urban combat, sniper tactics, and psychological warfare were all lessons learned in blood at Stalingrad. For Hitler, it was the beginning of the end. His armies would never recover the strength they lost in that frozen hell. For Stalin, it was validation. The Red Army could beat the Nazis, and they would. Some call Stalingrad the greatest battle in history, and others call it the greatest tragedy. But one thing is certain, it was the battle that broke Hitler's army forever. Was it worth the cost? Millions dead and a city destroyed. The answer depends on who you ask, but the soldiers who fought there knew one thing: if Stalingrad fell, the war was lost. And so they fought in the rubble and in the cold to the last bullet. And they won. If you want to explore more untold stories of history's greatest battles, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below about what battle should we cover next.